Excellent. Well, and another Calgarian, I cannot feel more at home. The reason I wanted to talk about working against our natural preferences is because I'm an ISFP and I worked in the school system for 32, 35 years. Never found myself in an educator, you know, in my colleagues, but always with my students. And so I wanted to talk about how when we are working in a structure or dealing in a structure where our opposite is necessary, what happens, what do we do, you know, what and how do we experience that? And Paul will be interested because I've got a Calgary Olympian that was my student, so we're going to look at him pretty quickly. So let's go ahead. One of my students, his name is Gilmore Jr. He, I want you to try to guess his type. I'm going to play a little bit of a couple of things that he's done. He's been in now 3 Olympics, 2014, 2018, and 2000, this year, 2022. And he's a fascinating young man. And he talks about dealing with opposite types. Every other person on the team, every other person, the National Sports School was in Calgary, and I worked a lot with them, and every other type that attended the National Sports School, there was no Gilmore there. Gilmore is a very different person and became famous for not winning an Olympic medal. And he was working always against his type. So I want to play just a little bit of this first video because he's talking about what it's like to be that working against your natural preferences. And he also just watched some of his Myers-Briggs training comes in because I did Myers-Briggs with the National Sports School. And I was so pleased that in 2022, Gilmore still uses that. This is one of his videos. So we'll play a little bit of it. Oh no, we went back.
And Adrian's back with us.
Well, we'll go with this
Beijing
one first.
Olympic Park with a story of a Canadian athlete looking to make his Olympic mark years after helping a teammate climb the podium. Adrian.
Hi there, Ian. It is interesting, you know, that every Olympics we all learn new names and new athletes, usually because of medals they've earned, but sometimes just because they're fantastic human beings. That's the case with speed skater Gilmore Jr. This is his 3rd Olympics. He's never won a medal. He certainly won hearts back in Sochi in 2014. He is back and trying for some glory of his own. There you are. Hey, Gilmore, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm great. It's really, really great to see you, and congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The moment Gilmore Jr. was named to Team Canada for Beijing, his 3rd Olympics, we hopped on a call to talk of his first.
A funny thought that people kind of know me for not winning a medal, let's say, but you know, I've always done my best on the ice and done it in a way that I feel proud of.
The measure of the man shown to Canada in Sochi 2014. Set to compete in the long track 1,000-meter final, he had an idea. He sent a message to teammate Denny Morrison, a favorite who'd missed out on a spot.
Denny Morrison, oh no!
Gilmore Jr. had a thought. He told Morrison by text message this week. It's still on his phone.
Okay, so are you ready to skate 1,000-meter? Yeah or nay? Who is this? And my bad, it's Gil. And then explicit. But are you offering?
Yeah. And that was a great big yes.
Yeah. I said, yeah, dude, I'm not going to win a medal, but I think you can. I love you, Gil.
He was right. Denny Morrison went on to win silver. Junio cheering on ringside, his understandably disappointed parents holding it together in the stands. The gesture so thoughtful, Canadian fans started a campaign to make him the flag bearer at the closing ceremony.
Gilmore Jr., if you're watching, thank you, buddy.
He didn't get that honor, but his place as a leader in the sport was cemented, and he has a lot to say.
Spent 12 years on the national team, and been kind of the only Filipino Canadian, one of the very few Asian Canadians on the team. And, I think that's something that, should change. And I don't think I should be the only one.
Why do you think that still is?
I think it's kind of the exposure of speed skating.
While he works with the sport to reach out to all Canadians, he encourages kids to see all sports as pathways to leadership. He's been doing that while working on his own training. Like so many Canadian athletes in the pandemic, little access to venues or competitions has meant improvisation, a strong roommate, a pretty good anchor weight for band work.
The one thing I take away from the pandemic is that, I think it really solidified, how much speed skating really means to me. And, when something's kind of taken away from you, you value it a bit more. And
Gil Jr., Canada, on the right.
Canada is pushing hard for another golden era in long track speed skating. And Gilmore.
Now, for some reason, the first clip that I had of Gilmore talking was ahead of that, and I can't go back somehow. But I'm gonna read this for those people who don't know, are not interested in either the Olympics or athletes or whatever. Gilmore is an INFP, and he's skating with a lot of ESTPs, ISTPs, and his TED Talk, and it's on the end of my article, and you can go back and read it. We won't look at it now because I can't seem to go back, but I'm just gonna read this TED Talk introduction. And what they say is the Olympic speed skater Gilmore Jr. shares his personal story of generosity and how building a culture of selflessness can lead to personal excellence. He recounts how there's that ruthlessness and that win at all costs in that whole, what he was brought up through, because he trained from a very early age, and he's probably the fastest starter in the world. But there's that ruthless win at any cost. And as an INFP, when we did type with him, he was very different than most of the other athletes at the sports school. And he says, despite all his accomplishments, it's what he did off the track that's very, very important. And that connection to people, to goodness, to generosity, to sharing with others. And he's become one of our, I think, certainly in Calgary anyway, one of a very well-known Olympian for not winning a medal, for being caring and for being generous and kind. He's a very interesting young man. And I remember his instructor. I never took students to my home ever. I never had them to my home, but I had retired and I was working. I did a lot of work with the National Sports School, and his teacher called me crying, and she said, I know you don't take people to your home, but I've given Gilmore's mother your phone number. And I said, that's okay, don't worry, don't cry. He was just so stressed, and so, he was training, and he had a Russian coach at that time, and he wanted him to train all the time, but his teachers also wanted him to get his education. And so there was that stress. So I had them come in, and his mom and dad came. My husband had to entertain them for several hours while I worked with Gilmore, but he was so different than, he talked about being so different than that ruthless sort of kill and just go. And so a fascinating young man. So if you can, when you go back, look at his TED Talk. I've got about 15 minutes of it, and it's just before. It's very interesting. Now, he is the exact opposite to this next young man. This young man is very fascinating. He's what I find is, because we can't use people that we've worked with or know in our workshops, I often use reality TV, and this is from MasterChef Canada. And this young man is, I'm gonna let you, this is his tape for, he wanted to become a contestant on MasterChef Canada. And I'm going to give you his language is interesting. He's a little different personality type. So I'm going to see if you can listen to him. Just a couple of minutes here. Oh, shoot.
So my name's Eric Chong.
Well, you're going to hear him.
I'm the chef owner of R&D restaurant here in Chinatown, France. So R&D started with me and majorly another partner named Alvin Lim. He was one of the judges on MasterChef Canada. He's also known as the Demon Chef, so that's the D element in R&D. If you didn't know, it stands for Rebel and Demon. So I would of course be the Rebel because I originally started as an engineer and in culinary or Chinese background. It's very custom for an Asian to be a doctor and engineer, and then kind of being a chef and choosing that as my profession is a bit rebellious in our culture. And then we chose this location because we obviously wanted an Asian themed restaurant, and we thought where else but Chinatown, and here is a beautiful open space. So since R&D opened about 4 years ago, we've been part of Licious since we began. So Summerlicious, Winterlicious. I think it's a great opportunity to reach other clientele or customers who won't normally dine at a restaurant. My favorite dish for Winterlicious is our.
We don't actually have to go through all the great food that he makes. The first little clip that I had was from his TED Talk, and I'm just going to read it to you because we didn't see it. This is him 3 years after he won MasterChef Canada. I think he may have won $100,000 with it. He certainly won acclaim, and he's connected to some great chefs, and he's opened a restaurant since then. But his description is University student. He was a chemical engineer. He went through chemical engineering. So again, working against our natural preferences, he didn't want to do it, but his parents said, you know, you have to be an engineer or doctor, and that was it, because that was, as he says, a part of his culture. And they describe him in the TED Talk as someone with boundless energy, upbeat. He was an energetic competitor. He wanted to change his life. They describe his parents as cruelly unsupportive. I don't think that they were, but they wanted him to become an engineer, certainly not a chef. But his grandpa was a chef, and his dad was a chef, and he was a natural. They describe him, when you see his other videos, he's frantic, he's disorganized, he's scatterbrained, he's unpredictable, and he's extremely gifted as a chef. He's very, very keen. He said when he was supposed to be studying, he was making food for everybody, you know, in the dorm. You know, he was supposed to be studying for his exams, and he was cooking, and he was basting the turkey, and he was looking online, and his mom and dad thought he was doing his papers, and he was looking at cooking shows and trying to figure out what he was doing. So again, he's another example of someone who was working against their natural preferences. He wanted desperately to be a chef. And I would guess, I'm only guessing, but I would say he's an ESTP. His language is rough. If you see a couple of his clips, he's pretty blunt. He's pretty in your face in that way, but he's so gifted and he's so talented. And so he went through, became a chemical engineer, and then, thank God, there was this reality program to go to. So he won it. He won the money, and finally his mom and dad said, okay, you know, and there's a lot of respect in his culture, and he did what his mom and dad wanted him to do. He became a chemical engineer, hated every minute of it. And he's just, you can see the difference. The second clip, and if you go back and look at the first clip, when you get the slides of all these, you can see how rough he was. His language is totally inappropriate. And you can see the clip that we just looked at, he's quite a different person in 3 years. those edges have been kind of smoothed. He's found success. He's one of really well known in his community and really respected in the food community, in Canadians anyway, know who he is. And he's in Toronto, thank goodness. So there's lots of opportunities for him. So again, working against our natural preferences sometimes works well. It almost didn't for him, but he took a chance and he said, I'm going to prove to my parents this way, by doing the television route, the reality TV, I'm going to prove to them that I really should do this and not be the chemical engineer. That he's got the ring, he passed, he did all his courses, but it was not his passion. Now, this is my husband and myself. I'm going to use my husband first. He took hotel and restaurant administration as his first passion. He went through, and then he found that there was a part of his the restaurant administration program that sends you to restaurants, and he wanted desperately. He found that when he started to work with restaurateurs, with chefs, that was what he would have loved to have done. But someone at his age, he was a young man, someone said to him, that's not a career for a family man. You're working nights, you're working late, you're working whatever, ta-da. I can get you a job at the city and you can retake all the courses and you can become a tax assessor. So he took this man's advice. He worked 32 years as a tax assessor, had open heart surgery because he was so stressed, I've never cooked a day in my life. He just is a fantastic chef, should have been a chef, should have done what his passion told him. He took advice from a very, an older, very respected individual who thought, had really good reasons why you shouldn't, be a restaurateur. However, he didn't know he was going to marry me, and I stay awake till 3 a.m, and we would have been just fine. But and we could have easily adapted to that lifestyle. But the person had his best interests at heart, but it really wasn't. It caused him a lot of stress over his life. His passion now is his hobby. He can taste anything and he can tell you what's in it. He'll be in a restaurant and he'll go, there's this, and this. And I think, how sad that he wasn't able to, find his passion. So then there's me. As an ISFP, I became a teacher. I didn't know what else to do. I like to read. I was an only child. My mom would walk me to the library, so I loved reading. And someone said to me, oh, isn't that interesting? Because I think sometimes people think ISPs don't like to read. And sometimes they don't, but those are all murder mysteries back there. So Jim sometimes I think worries when he goes to sleep that I might, read and, but this was the first school that I worked at. There's me, the ISFP. And then this school, there were 129 staff, 2,300 students. That was where I first met the gentleman who runs the National Sports School. Now we work together. But what I found was I was always going against the grain. I had a principal that said to me, Marianne, I want you, I have all these students that should fail, coming into this high school from their junior high school. We don't want to fail them. And then there was a policy at that time through the Calgary School Board that you don't fail. But they were not ready to go on. And so this principal said, will you design a program for them? And so I never really, after my first 2 or 3 years teaching, never taught in traditional classroom, because there were so many SPs, and I'm going to show you, this is an old program that I used at the time. They never found themselves in the school system. And so they were running again, they were working against their natural preferences. So for them to find someone that was their type, that got through somehow. And I remember my mom and my dad used to say, how do you always know where the pass is? If it's 70%, you get it. If it's 90%, you get it. If it's 20%, you get it. Just did enough to get by. I guess I had enough brains to sort of get me through, because my work habits certainly didn't, for sure. So this is what I felt like my whole career. You're going always, why am I here? What am I doing? I'm the flautist, and I don't know how to play this thing. And yet working against my natural type brought an alternative to both my students, but the staff that I worked with, because they could see there's an alternative way of dealing with school, and it doesn't have to be that traditional. These were my students. I collected, and eventually I was doing well enough that they would give me in a big high school. When you're doing all the programming, you always have one teacher here or there that they've got one period that you don't know what to do with them. So they put me in the library and they said, we'll give you all the extra odds and sods from all over. And any student that is going to either drop out, has dropped out, or is at risk of dropping out, bring them into your program, and then we'll do whatever. So this was the group that we first started to work with. And you can see who's there: the ISTPs, the ISFPs, the STPs, the ESFPs, and then there's a smattering of everybody. There were once in a while an ENTJ and an ENFJ, but not that much. The NFPs often, they get all insulted and say, well, we love school, we love to read. I'm sure you're wrong on this. I'm sure every one of my ENFPs, I'm almost certain, got ticked off because their teacher either got angry, not usually with them, with another student. They wanted to leave because of a personal issue. And it had to do always with someone was angry with, someone didn't treat someone right. I had a young woman, she's brilliant young woman. She has a PhD now. She refused to come to school for a whole year. And her mom said, okay, that's fine. And she let her do it. She was an ENFP, but she felt like the teacher had been cruel to another young man in the classroom. And she was protesting. And so I found that the ENFPs who wanted to drop out, and a lot of times the Ns, there was something in an issue that was sort of personal or interpersonal in that way. The SPs, they were going to leave just because the structure of school just didn't match their style. My students, we set up a program where it was comfortable. If you want to read, fine. People, more traditional staff would come to our area, and I'd always have one other staff member with me because I was doing assessment and they needed someone there. I'd set up the program and then they'd sort of work on it, and extra odd and sod that they didn't have, they needed a program. But they'd stand at the door and they'd look and they'd say, but there are no desks. And we'd say, well, yes, I know, but they're reading. And they all had to write common examinations and they were doing very well. But this was our at-risk group who needed an independent study. I would do the psychoeducational assessment. That was my background and training, was in reading. And so I do an assessment and then I design a program and go to their teachers and ask if they could adapt some ways in their classroom, but then we would keep them for at least one period of an 8-period day. At the time, they were on 8 periods a day. They were in a semestered school. So we would keep these guys and we'd try to work with them because, again, a lot of them were working against their natural preferences. They were bright, intelligent, able, but the structure wasn't there for them. This group, school started like August 30th, 31st. Is there a 31st in August? I don't know. Anyway, by September 10th, these guys had been kicked out. Now, again, the ANFPs go, that's not possible. Right, the very first day of school or first week. And again, each one of those ENFPs that wanted to leave the very first week, it was something harsh was said, maybe not even to them, to another student. And they said, I'm not taking this. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. And so we have to be very, I always tell educators, you have to be very careful. You don't know how people are taking what you're saying, basically. That was the structure of our classroom. And I had an office at the back where I did private assessments. And then you can see how old it was by the computers. But our students love that structure. We didn't have them write exams when the exams, we didn't set examinations if we were giving them a course. We often didn't. We did study skills or whatever, but we did do courses there. And what we did is we had them work on their own time frame. And sometimes they had to extend it 1.5 years or a year and a few extra months. And so we ran the program so that they could work at their own pace. And it made a huge difference to all these guys. This gentleman finally came to work with me full time. My office was in the back where no one could see who I was assessing. And then there was always someone else in the program, but it looked like chaos to most of my colleagues, but they knew it was working. So they said, we'll pay for it because it's working. And we're not losing these kids, and they're doing well on their diploma examinations. That's all they cared about. So whatever. This was an interesting group, my beauty culture girls. The school had a hair salon, and the students could write their, they could have a ticket coming out of there, and they could open a salon. They could do hair if they wished to. So this was my beauty culture group. But what I wanted to talk to you about with this group, the students were not an unusual configuration. You would sort of say from type, yeah, I could see that a lot of this group especially would maybe be interested in beauty culture. But the instructors were interesting. We worked with so many of these girls. The instructor was, there were 2 instructors. One was an ISFP, and she certainly understood her group. And then the main instructor was an ISTJ. And she kept sending me students, and she kept sending me one student especially that I've still kept in touch with. And she'd send her down, and she was a little ESFP, and she'd say, I can't have her in the salon. She dances and she sings. And I thought, yeah, so what? That's nice. I'd like my hairdresser to dance and sing. And she said, she can't dance and sing. She's not being professional. Well, since that time, I just talked to her before we left Calgary a couple of years ago. She and her husband, who was in the mechanics program, I'll talk about him later, they bought her mom's house. She is a really good hairdresser. And she said, Marianne, you can't believe it. My kids are going to all the same schools I did. She said, and I can tell them where to hide because, of course, she hated school. She just hated school, but she was just so joyful and so wonderful, and her clients love her. She's one of the most successful hairdressers you've ever dealt with. And since I moved here, I haven't had a good haircut since I left Calgary, for sure. The machine shop group, this was an interesting group. Again, the working with our preferences. Students were great. The instructor was an ENTJ. He had grown up in Europe, and his family, I don't know if they didn't have the money to send him to university. He wanted so much to work in any area that was physics based. And so he didn't have that opportunity. So he trained, and he worked in Calgary. And then when Calgary School Board has a program where they take individuals who work in the industry, in plumbing, heating, machine shops, etc., and they have them train as educators, and then they put them in their vocational schools. And so the gentleman who ran this program was this ENTJ. And he said, I'd go to find him to talk to him about one of his students. I could never find him. And I would say, Bruno, where do you go when you take a break or at lunch or whatever? He said, I go to the physics class. And he always sat in the high level, top level physics class. And he did all the calculations. That was a pleasure for him. That was what he loved. That was what he couldn't do as a young person, but he certainly, every chance you got, you knew where to find Bruno. He was with a physics student, with the gifted students who were doing physics, anything in that line. So he wasn't able to do it as for a career, but he certainly had a lot of contact, working through the school system. It was excellent. But again, somehow those of us who are working against our national preferences find a way to deal with, those opposites where we're sort of running against a whole group of people that we don't really understand. We like them, they're very nice, but our minds don't work that way. Construction man, same thing. He was a brilliant man. He was an INTP, but hadn't had the opportunity really to pursue a university education when in his youth, and so then had an opportunity to do that program once he was working in the construction trade. He was a superb educator, for sure. Plumbing and heating man, same. The next group I worked with, I moved from this school and I went to the precursor to the National Sports School. This was a school, again, I was the only one. Very few SPs there. There were more in my other school because they had some technical courses. This school didn't at the time. And again, it was the precursor to the National Sports School. And the principal there, she had all the gifted students coming at that time from all over the city, which was interesting. But she also, she had a lot of, she was very insistent to her staff that she wanted an alternative for her students. So this was a very interesting school to work at, smaller group. But it was a real, everybody was singing, there was dancing in the halls, there was singing, there was, they were playing instruments. A couple of students from the gifted program slept, and they had a car park. They still do probably have a car park there, where the staff parked, and they slept in the car park overnight because they wanted to gauge the reaction of their teachers in the morning. So they were a quirky group. I liked them. I still preferred the the students who were more at risk. This was this group was a little bit different, but because they were taking a lot of the athletes that eventually went to the National Sports School, that I was good for them to, to help them kind of set up a program there. I was their assistant principal for a couple of years before I retired, so I had a little bit more power to set up things the way I wanted to. I don't want to look at this anymore. To have something for your students, for all your students, is so essential. To offer areas where we can work against our natural preferences, where we can let that out, will keeps us in the jobs that we love, keeps kids in the school, to allow them to have alternate ways of dealing is exceptionally important. Because I needed to have someone with me all the time, because I was doing most of the assessments, so there was always had to be an educator in the room. A gentleman came and was very interested in the program. His name was Gary Ryan. He was an INFP, and he taught creative writing and journalism. He wasn't so keen on journalism from the INFP point of view. He thought it was too structured. He loved creative writing. He said, I'll bring my creative writing students so that we don't only have students who are at risk. We have students who are creating because these students are as creative. They just haven't had the opportunity to really connect to school. So when Gary brought his group in, you didn't know after a while who was a creative writing student and who was one of my at-risk group, because he melded them together. He was amazing. As an INFP, he could seem to be able to just get to them immediately. And it didn't matter who they were. He had a gifted writer. He had one of my at-risk students who maybe couldn't even write. By the end of it, Gary made sure they could write. So it's a very interesting structure to really, people were appalled when they came to our group. They would say, but they have their feet up, they're listening, they're doing whatever. And they're learning, and they're coping, and they're excited about what they're doing. Now I want to give you a chance to just talk just for a minute. I want you to, we all know what drafting is. I mean, even if we have never seen a draftsman work, we have an idea. I just want you to give me an idea of what you think the drafting class would look like from the grid, the 16 types. What I thought was that from the drafting class, I had a concept of what I thought drafting class would look like. Anybody want to give me a guess?
I would have guessed ISTP.
Me too.
I was going to ask the same question as Richard. When you say drafting, is that technical design? Kind of what is that?
Yeah, the actual technical aspect of drafting.
Okay.
They weren't at that point, because they were in year 10, 11, and 12. They weren't designing at that point because they were working on their basic skills. Some of this group would have been there for 3 years, and they just started with the concept of drafting. And so they were just learning the basics at that point. That's what I know about drafting. I don't know. Does that make sense, Sarah?
Yeah, I would say STJ, STP, as Paul said.
Me too. That's what I thought. And this was the group that year. And I couldn't figure it out for a while. And then I realized both instructors were INFP. And so we talked about it a great deal. And I said, now, why drafting? It seems so precise and so almost regimented to me, not being a draftsman, not knowing, and both of them said, because as an artist, I couldn't feed my family. And so I went back and retrained as a draftsman. And I could get a job as a draftsman, and I could feed my family and we could eat, and then I could do my art on the side. But there's something about them, the two of them, that drew not what the individuals that I sort of speculated would be the draftsmen. They drew there was more art happening than drafting. The skills were being taught because they were superb draftsmen, but again, they were working against their preferences. They were artists who became draftsmen because they needed to eat, basically. Their drafting wasn't their first love, it was their second. They were superb draftsmen, but they were artists that had to do something because they certainly were not making enough money to have a family and a lifestyle that, where you can buy groceries through their art. So I was really interested in this group, especially because, again, they were really working against their natural styles. But for some reason, so were a lot of the students that were drawn to them. They were exuding something that I certainly didn't see it. I was really actually very surprised when I talked to both men that they were both INFP. And then they started to show me their art. And, then when we talked about it, I thought, yeah, it makes sense. If I had known about this group in Britain, I would have gone there and trained, and I would have known what I wanted to do as an individual. I'm going to play these two clips. I don't know, probably people in Britain watch this. We have a PBS channel here that comes from Britain. So I've been watching The Repair Shop all the time. These are my people. These are what I would have done had I known that they existed, and had I known that you could sort of live in this world, basically. So there are just two clips. I think they're a minute or 3 minutes each, and then we can sort of talk about. Now, I'm not going to play the rest of it. She's my hero. I think she's an ISFP. She's so talented. I would, if I were looking for a career, I would want to be her. I didn't realize that everybody didn't see shades of color. I'd go shopping and I'd go for something black, and there'd be 4 things up on the wall. And I'd say, I want something to match this vest. And the person helping me said, but there are 4 things there, they're black. And I'd say, well, that's a brown black, that's a blue black, that's a black black, I want black black. And Kirsten, if you ever watch the show, she has an eye for color. And I think she's an ISFP. And that's the job I would have wanted if I had known it existed. A little old now to have figured it out, but there's my gift. That's what I could have done. I couldn't have done the art, but I could have restored it and fixed it. For me, I don't have the vision of an artist, but I have the hands that could have worked as she did at the Victoria and Albert Museum. She can fix anything, and she can match a color to this will look brand new by the time she's finished with it. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So I always try to find this show because I think I could have been that. I could have done that. So I worked against my type, but what can you do? I mean, we all do what we can do. So if for those people who are looking for examples of people who maybe you haven't met, but in your workshops you want to find somebody who is a Christian, who's an ISFP, who's doing what they love. Go to reality TV. It's full of examples of people pursuing careers or activities that they had a passion and drive for, but some sensible person, like my husband's, mentor, they said, don't do this, do something else. And if you watch the Great British Baking Show, or all of those reality TV where you have all these lawyers and engineers and teachers and professors, and all these people are on the Great British Baking Show. They're there because they have a passion for baking. And some of them go on and go, I've been hitting my head against the wall. My mom said, be a doctor, be an anesthesiologist, become a police officer, whatever. And what I really wanted to do was this. So, in the end, we had an architect who wanted to build cookie structures, and he did. And he built this enormous structure out of cookies, but he wanted to bake. But his family said, well, baking, you should go on and you have this eye, and he was an architect. So many of them are so interesting to watch. And I think when you're looking for examples of type to use in workshops, I find that like this kind of a reality TV where they're real people doing real things, but also doing something that they always wanted to do, but didn't have the opportunity. The anesthesiologist who really wanted, to do, to be a builder. Goodwood is another reality TV. It's a British program where they work with wood and they create beautiful things, but they've done often something else. Someone said, oh no, don't be a wood sculpture, be this. So when we work against our type, that joy and that color and that love of what we're doing isn't there. We're successful at it, we do it. I was successful at what I did always, but was it my passion? No, it wasn't. And so I think if we can only not work against our natural preferences, if we had the encouragement from somebody, or had the will to just say, no, I'm going to do this. And that would be what I want to do. So that's us. And if, this poor owl, I love him.
Marianne, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording so we can have a chat between us here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.